Welcome to lesson 2 of the full course, How to Win Architectural Competitions. In this lesson, we're going to take the information from the competition brief and start developing an architectural concept. Inside Rayon, I'll walk you through how I start diagramming and conceptualizing in response to the site conditions, opportunities, and constraints. We'll look at how to create concept diagrams and form a design geometry and direction in response to the brief. You're welcome to follow along with the class by creating a free Rayon account using the link below or jumping into the template from the description. Okay, so to start responding to the brief and building a design concept, I'm first going to import the site as a DWG and start using that as a base for our diagrams moving forward. So this will give us a base to start responding to the site conditions and the space requirements to build our response to the brief. And as introduced in the previous lesson, the canvas are a whiteboard to experience and get creative. And that is the benefit and the beauty of Rayon, is that you have a whiteboard, an infinite space where you can design and create. And so we're going to import the site as a DWG, and I'll show you how we can then start utilizing the style panel, and I'll introduce the style panel to you guys so you can start manipulating the graphics and start editing and working into the site plan. So what we're going to do is we're going to head over to the left hand side here with the 3 lines. We're going to click import DWG, and then we're going to head over to our site plan and we're going to click open. You'll then get a few options here where you want to import hidden layers, empty layers, blocks without instance. I'm just going to untick all of them and click import. And as you can see, this is the site plan when it comes in. Continue, and then it will scale the model. Do continue. You can then pick your insertion point. So I'll click one corner, click enter, and this will be imported at a 1:1 scale. And you can adjust that, you can amend it if you wanted to import something at a different scale. But for the purpose of this, because it's a site plan and we want to start working into this at scale, I've imported it at 1:1. Now, as you can see, this drawing is quite intense at this point, and I think when you want to work into the graphic style of this drawing, you want to maybe drop down the houses, for example, and maybe not making them as strong, maybe bringing out some of the detail elements that we want to focus on in the park, for example, the paths, or maybe the palace itself, and making it a little bit bolder. And you can use that by using the style panel. So down the right hand side here, you've got the style panel where you can basically manage the 4 different types of styles. You've got shapes and surfaces, you've got blocks, you've got walls, and you've got annotations. So they're all the 4 different styles types that you can work into. And I will go in much more detail into styling your drawings and really working into all of these elements. But by way of an introduction to the style panel, if you were to, for argument's sake, draw a rectangle, and I can show you how you can potentially fill this, you'd head over to the right hand side, you click fill. And then in the fill option, you have a few different options here. You've got color fill, which is where you can basically just select a color. So you can either do any recent colors that you've used. You can input the hex, you can change the opacity. You can see here that we can then change and amend that shape with the fill. You can then look at gradients, so you can actually create a gradient where you can change the start color. So if, for example, if you want to go to red to black, you can then use textures. So Rayon has a full library of textures where you can edit the pattern. You can also import your own texture, so you can upload texture yourself, or you can edit the texture by changing the exposure, the contrast, the saturation, hue, etc., and you can reset that. You can also change the scale of the texture. For example, if you wanted to have much larger bricks, or you wanted to change the rotation, you want to change direction, and you can also then apply your exposure, contrast, saturation, hue, etc. And then you've got a hatch. So once again, there is a full library of hatches that you can use, and you can import more into this if you wanted to. If you had your own hatches, you can import them in. For example, if we selected Spanish shingles and we scaled that up, so if you go edit, transform up to, I don't know, 1:20, or sorry, 20 times. So we could do it maybe 10 times or 5 times, however you want to do it. And then you can maybe put a background to that. You could do maybe a red background. And then you could change maybe the fill or the stroke to white. So you've got white pattern on a red background. So you have a lot of opportunity here to really work into your fill. And then finally, you can import an image. You can upload an image that you want to use as a pattern. Now, if you wanted to edit a pre-existing element. For example, in this model, we've imported this DWG. It will come in as layers depending on the way that the model is set up. So for example, if you drop down the import, the way that the DWG was set up in the export, you will have all of those layers available. So for example, if we selected general lines, so just make sure we've got those, you can click this little toggle here to make it an active layer. You can then right click, select children. So that will select all of the elements on that layer. And then you can over to the right hand side here and you can already see that there are styles that are already preloaded in when you imported the DWG. Now there's a few options here. You can either detach all styles, so you could detach them and create a new style yourself. So for argument's sake, if we wanted to attach all of those, we can then manage that stroke and fill for those elements and potentially create a new style based on that element. So for example, if we then click stroke, we then change the line weight to 1 millimeter, and then potentially we could change the opacity right down to maybe 50% so the lines are much more softer. And then once you're happy with that particular style for that layer, you can head over to the right hand side here and click save style. So you have three options. You've got pick style, save style, or replace all. Now if we want to save this style, we can give it we can call it let's say general line, and then basically anytime that we want to batch apply a style to a certain line or a shape, we can apply that style to it. And now you can spend some real time building into this, so you can then edit some of the styles that are already pre-saved. So if we do edit style, we could potentially increase the opacity of this to make this water slightly stronger, and you could play around with this for a long time to build up the style of the drawing to arrive at something like this. So this is a site plan that I've worked into, and I've built my style to create a kind of much more softer site plan that draws attention to the key elements of the park, making the houses and surrounding elements not as dominant in the drawing, but also having hints of blue in there. That's going to be the kind of graphic language and tone of the drawings throughout this competition. And now into define an area where we want to kind of focus our design and start locating our museum. I think there's a really key point on this site that is really fundamental in terms of access and for the kind of flow of pedestrians and flow of visitors that are coming into this site. And that is this zone at the top right corner here. So this zone here is where the train is coming in. So this is where you've got your overground train that is arriving into Alexandra Palace. And this bridge here is your kind of key entry point for vehicles into the site right in this top corner here. So the flow of traffic currently is cars coming up into Alexandra Palace, where you have a car park and these kind of parking zones. And this is where most of the flow of traffic is coming into the palace. And so with that being said, I think the arrival point for our museum will want to be a part of that and not kind of tucked away and out of the way. We want to kind of make use of those visitors that are going to be arriving into the site and potentially find a location in this zone where we can kind of draw some of that pedestrian and that vehicular access into our site. And so along this path here, you've got obviously a few opportunities where you could embed potentially a lower point down here, maybe at this higher point here, where you've got your kind of car park. And what would be really useful as part of this design is if we can maybe utilize the existing car park, maybe provide a secondary smaller car park. And so if we take this particular zone of interest and dive into a little bit more detail, what I have now here is the contours, and I've got some kind of height points where I can start talking and showing you the kind of drastic change in height and the opportunity of the slope. So at this point here, you've got 70 meters. We then jump up to 80 meters. So there's a 10-meter difference here in this contour. These contour lines are roughly around 5-meter contours. You've got then a higher zone up here of 78, which slopes up to 84. And then the highest point, I believe, over here at the palace is 93 meters. So from the palace all the way down to the bottom of this slope, we're talking a good 30-meter level change, which is quite significant. And so therefore, there's obviously a huge opportunity for working into this slope. And as you can see here, the kind of slope is gradienting up in this direction. So we have a bit of a hill in this zone, in this direction here. And as we've already discussed this, if we've got pedestrians coming in through here, and we've got pedestrian walkways this way, we've got pedestrian walkway through here, and this lighter, this kind of grey tone here are all kind of pedestrian paths. This zone in the middle here might be a key opportunity for us to almost utilize that geometry of the pathways, utilize the slope that is kind of increasingly quite significantly in this zone leading up to the palace. We then have obviously some car parking zone up here, and so this kind of slither around here could be a really interesting point to start looking at an opportunity to start designing our scheme. So at this point, if you wanted to do a bit of a site analysis and a bit more in-depth review of the site conditions, if you head over to the left hand side here, we're going to start using layers, which are really important. Now, layers work very similarly in Rayon as they do across many of the softwares. Layers is just a way of developing a hierarchy and a structure to your drawings to make sure that you're able to hide or reveal certain elements that you do or don't want to reveal, or if you want elements to be on top of another when you're structuring your drawings, to make sure that the hierarchy of the drawing is clear and correct. Now, in this case, if we wanted to do some kind of a quick site analysis and start adding some elements into this, thinking about the site condition and the site access, for example, vehicular and pedestrian access, what we're going to do is we're going to click this little plus button. We're going to create a new layer, site analysis. Now, one thing I'm going to do, and I think is first and foremost a really key feature of this, is your access points and your vehicular and pedestrian access. So we're just going to take a circle, for example, and we can start potentially annotating this with maybe some zones or areas of interest. For example, this could be an area of interest for your site access. This could then also then be your main point of interest when you come actually into the site, into the park. And we can select those two elements, hold down shift, select both of them, and we could potentially give that a light fill as shown. Maybe we'll give it a 10% fill, and then we can change that stroke to maybe 0.5 with a dash around it. So that's dashed at maybe 10, so it's a slightly smaller dash. And then potentially we could say, okay, we want to annotate this to indicate this vehicular access, so we could potentially draw a line, click enter to stop that, turn off the fill, maybe increase the stroke, so we want to make this a much thicker line weight. We want to make the dash much smaller, or maybe make that 5, make that 0.5, and then we could potentially add a little, and then we can use the pick style, select that element, and there you go, it'll be the same style. And now this we probably want to be a little bit stronger, so we're going to make actually that 100%. Likewise with those elements, and we're going to save that as a style. So we'll call that access lines. So you can begin to start annotating your drawings, start doing a bit of a site analysis, and spend a bit of time building on the drawing to arrive at something kind of simple like this, where you've got a main line in for access, which is slightly thicker. You then got a slightly smaller line for pedestrian access. You could potentially put a key into this and make sure that it's all indicated clearly. I've then got a small block here for kind of pedestrian routes and pathways, just to indicate that on the site analysis. You've then got the sun path and your main access points with your north arrow as a block too. And I will talk in much more detail about blocks further down the line. And the main things that we want to focus on is the vehicular access, pedestrian access, the slope, the change in levels, and then also the views over the landscape. So because this is your highest point, the areas at the top here by the palace are much higher. Obviously the park is sloping down quite significantly, as you can see here by the contours. And so at the high point, you've got some really brilliant views across London. And so we want to make sure that basically we want to activate all of this zone looking down across the park as potentially views over the landscape. Okay, so now that we understand the site condition, the opportunities, the constraints that we want to respond to, we're now going to start building the spatial diagram, the concept diagram, and start forming some of the geometries and the spatial relationships between these various zones that have been identified in the brief. So these are the zones as identified in the first lesson. We've got the entrance, lobby, theatre space, cafes, gallery spaces, etc. And we're going to try and create a bit of a kind of spatial relationship between these spaces and see how we can start building that design in here. So first things first we're going to do is we're going to zoom right into this zone. This is going to be the area of interest. Now, just for argument's sake, I'm going to highlight all of this. I'm going to right click it and I'm going to lock it, which means that basically anything that I do now, I won't intervene with that kind of background. So it just acts as a background now, as a base to the drawing. And I'm also going to create a new layer and I'm going to call it zones. So we're going to first start defining some zones. So if we come down to the bottom tab here, we've got 4 elements. You've got the wall opening zone and zone divider. Now for this case, we're going to use a zone divider. So if we select the zone divider, I'm going to select arc. I'm going to click one end, select the other, and then join that round. So we've got a perfect circle here that we can then start placing. We can start scaling up, scaling it down. And what we would do is create a bit of a graphic language. So we'll probably change that line weight to 1. And then what you can do is you can then use zones and drop that into here, and it will give you a zone for that space. So then when you start scaling this up and down, you can see it starts changing proportionately. And this is really helpful for building those kind of spatial diagrams and understanding the space allocations that we are kind of looking to achieve. So we have, as mentioned, we have your kind of public areas and your back of house areas. The first key point of entry, I believe, in this site is this zone here. We have a clear kind of opportunity to utilize this junction where we have a kind of road here. I think in reality, this is actually a closed off road, so we wouldn't actually use this, but we could use this as a point of access to bring kind of vehicles off this main pedestrian route in, main vehicular route in, and bring it into this zone. And we could potentially provide a kind of car park or something down here in this zone as you arrive off this junction, which means that we could potentially have a zone of entry point around here where we could maybe have the gallery entrance point. We could then potentially have a cafe zone at the front here. So we're creating this kind of front entrance of this space here. And then you have your main foyer, your entrance foyer, maybe in this zone here. So you've kind of got this entry point. You're creating a bit of a geometry here of entry so that you've got a kind of language coming into the building here where you've got this space allocation. Then this maybe could have arguably maybe an external terrace out the front. For argument's sake, our theatre space in the back end of here, because the theatre, which would be hosting talks and various events, conferences, for example, that would be much more preferred to be embedded into the landscape at the back here because it won't need natural lighting. You'll need to be able to control the acoustics, for example. And so by embedding it in the back, that could work. People arriving into the entrance, they can either go in this direction for the gallery, they can either go in this direction for the cafe, and then they can either go in this direction then for the theatre spaces at the back here. When we start thinking about workshop spaces, and so I think there was a 300 square meter of workshop spaces, but what we could probably do is if that is 100 square meters, we could divide it into 3 100 square meter zones, where this could almost have a relationship with the gallery, but it also is built along this edge here. So we could maybe utilize the views across the landscape down here. This could also kind of run parallel to this geometry, which could work quite nicely, quite well in terms of the kind of building form. We could even maybe push this further back so it's more embedded into the landscape. We can then maybe utilize all of this backspace here for storage. So maybe we could even have maybe smaller scale storage, and we had maybe some back of house storage associated with each workshop at the back. And then maybe for the main gallery storage, it could even be below ground. So you'd come in at ground level, you'd come into the entrance, your gallery, you could maybe have a lift at some point here, which could take you up onto maybe a roof terrace. And then maybe at the back here, on lower ground, or maybe even in a basement. So if we're saying 200 square meters for a gallery. So then you kind of got this kind of language where you've got this wing down here. Maybe if you've got storage here and you don't want the back of house entrance being at the front, maybe you could bring a back of house entrance up here and maybe utilize this car park and integrate something up here. We could then have a back of house entrance up here, which could then link these spaces together. That could work quite well. And so you're starting to define the relationships where you have this open entrance space to create this gallery as a really key feature of entering the building, the cafe being a really public, inviting zone, the terrace being an integration with that cafe. And then you've got your theatre space kind of tucked away behind you. Then got storage as back end space, so we can even make that, maybe let's make it red. And I'm just going to spend a bit of time cleaning this up. And we can arrive at something like this. And I think in terms of the language and geometries, it works quite well. You've then got this relationship between the back of house entrance and those storage spaces linking to the back here. You've then got your main exhibition space, which could derive some geometry out the front here, and the entrance foyer, terrace, etc. So I'm just going to create a new layer to start forming maybe some kind of, I'm going to call it boxes for now, but this is essentially going to be, if we draw some rectangles, and maybe we'll make that slightly less even, and I'm gonna start basically rotating this. And now that we have the kind of the spatial relationship and the sizes of the rooms and the kind of way that these are kind of linking spaces, we can then start maybe defining them as actual blocks. So maybe we define this, that central zone is your exhibition space, your kind of your entrance foyer that is kind of connecting with that. You then maybe got your theatre space at the back here. You've then got almost this strip of form that is running along parallel to this wall here, and then maybe this could even rotate and tuck in there. So you almost have a bit of a language where you've got this kind of these really long elements, and maybe as part of some of the precedent studies that we'll look into, maybe we have a design language that's quite minimal and it's quite monolithic, with then some elements of vertical components and poking of a window, and so we can have some of these kind of longer elements that are then broken up by some slight kind of rotation and geometries. And so then if we start actually defining some of this geometry and start breaking up these elements, I mean, I think as we've said, we've got a kind of clear point of entry here with maybe some kind of parking spaces that are driving and following that geometry of this space. But what we can do now is maybe we could start doing kind of geometry and start finding a geometry. Let's just do a really kind of thick line, maybe 10 point. We won't do it dashed. We won't have it solid. Maybe we can start identifying, okay, that could be your external wall. Maybe this element could even kind of cut back like this. Maybe even angle in to your entrance foyer. And then maybe this element cuts out like so. But if we arrive at something like this, just clean this up slightly, where, as I've mentioned before, you create your point of entry and your kind of elements that are kind of cutting away and creating these viewpoints, and where the geometry is kind of cutting away at the building. So you have these views down into this zone. You then have these elements that are running parallel to the slope. You've got some kind of storage units associated with the workshops, but you've got separate back of house. You've got geometry that's slightly tilted at the end. And then maybe you have these elements and geometries that have shifted slightly off center, slightly off parallel. And I think a really key thing, and when we go into the kind of floor plans, elevations and sections, the level changes are going to be really critical to identify that internal spatial arrangements, but also between the levels internally. So we'll probably have a ground, maybe a lower ground, where this maybe step up into these workshops because of the significant change in level. But in terms of geometry, I think this is kind of what we're going to work with. And so now we've kind of understood the type of geometry and language that we're going for and how we want to embed it into the landscape. And now I just wanted to put together a bit of a mood board and show you kind of Rayon's really kind of brilliant whiteboard style canvases to create mood boards and diagrams and kind of spaces to think and start kind of thinking through your design. And also you can share this with your team members who can then add and comment and add their own images, maybe annotate some of these and really kind of understand some of the precedent studies in more detail. But what I've done is I've just dropped in a few images here that I'm going to start kind of composing into a bit of a mood board. And I've done this by just heading over to the left hand side, clicking menu, doing import, and then import image. And then just importing these images that I have saved. And then you can just drag them in and place them in. You can then use this toggle at the top to scale them up and down. And then a really great feature that Rayon has is that if you select one of your images, you go over to the right hand side where you've got shapes. You've got three options here. You could do generate, you can do upscale. And one thing I wanted just to focus on in this case for this mood board is removing backgrounds, which is really kind of nice to give your drawing some kind of a little bit more detail and make it a little bit more creative. So if you do remove background, you'll see that automatically it's kind of thinking through removing the background, and straight away, boom, you've kind of got your own PNG where the background has been removed. You can then change some of the exposure if you wanted to. You can increase it, you could decrease it. We could set it back to 0 because I actually quite like this image. Click done, and it will load it into your white canvas without the background, which I think works really well. So as part of the design, I think it's quite clear the kind of the design quality that we're going for here. Based on these images, they're very kind of similar styles. But what we're trying to go for, I think, is a real kind of simple geometry and form that is embedded into the landscape. So you have this kind of monolithic style where you've got these almost voids, these large forms where you've got kind of elements that are cutting away at it. Some of them are kind of solid, some of them are void. You've got these kind of openings, expansive openings, but they're leaning into the landscape. They're almost sat into the landscape. And so whilst the geometry almost provides a bit of a juxtaposition to the landscape, it's also embedding into it. And there's elements where you've got landscaping on top of roofs, where it creates kind of pathways, it creates moments of views, it creates kind of moments of kind of maybe some more kind of quieter, secluded areas that are kind of protected by the landscape. And so this is the kind of style that we're going for, where you kind of fully embed the kind of building into the landscape, but you have these moments of windows, these picture windows that create moments for views, that creates moments to kind of break up that monolithic style architecture. And I think this precedent here is a really beautiful one where the materiality is actually really important. The use of stone, I think, would be really powerful in the scheme. If we want to embed it into the landscape and want it to be a part of the landscape and choose a material that is going to be sustainable and kind of really work well with the landscape, I think stone is a really great option. And then using timber for potential windows and detailing for like kind of vertical elements, using maybe them as fins to create moments for lighting, for the internal spaces, but also to break up some of the design kind of geometry. If we've got kind of long monolithic elements, we could have some maybe vertical timber elements at different rhythms, for example, at different scales, to create a kind of design language. So for example here, this is creating kind of picture windows with your louvered fins. We could then maybe look at kind of timber battens to create a kind of slightly different rhythm and a slightly different intensity to the architecture. And these are the kind of details and thresholds between materiality that I think are going to work really well for this scheme when we embed it into the landscape. In terms of design, you can see here, this is actually really simple, but it's really clean, it's neat, it's minimal. And so this is a kind of nice geometry where you've got moments of solid and void, moments where you can look through. For example here, this is a kind of louver that you can look through. Similarly here with the stone, thresholds between timber and stone could work really nicely. This kind of more kind of playful and craft-like details and elements could be also really nice. And so I'm going to compose this into a bit of a mood board. We can do that quite simply by aligning them. You'll see that they snap. And so here you can see we can combine a bit of a kind of mood board where you can link some of the elements, highlighting these kind of vertical timber fins and looking at the detail and almost kind of pulling out some of these elements of the kind of composition and the kind of proportions of windows to wall, for example, solid to void, and these details that we're kind of interested in. I've also then pulled out some of this kind of design geometry showing the kind of slope, and you've got this really simple form. Likewise here, where you've got this kind of you've got different elements of it kind of stepping up and stepping down, and likewise with this, how you've got these kind of viewpoints and these vantage points that you're almost designing the building so that it isn't interrupting the views across the landscape, but it's almost working with the landscape in that way to create a new viewpoint and a new landscape, and the architecture becoming a part of that, minimizing the intervention of the scheme. Likewise with the kind of different geometries sat on top of each other and how they might cantilever, and internal and external perspectives, etc. So this is kind of mood board, my kind of thinking and ideas towards the scheme. And so in the next lesson, we're going to jump in much more detail for the kind of design of the floor plan and the spatial arrangement, in terms of actually putting in some kind of internal partitions and external walls, and start defining where windows and doors might be located. And we're going to build on the concept we developed to start spatially arranging the museum inside Rayon, all inside Rayon. And you can already start to see the power of Rayon and how great it is as a tool to pretty much do everything from start to finish. And if you haven't yet already, make sure you've created your free Rayon account, or take a look at the course templates linked in the description. So thank you for watching lesson 2, and I'll see you in the next class.